Hello everybody and welcome to Igor's Japanese Language Dojo, the ultimate place for studying and analyzing Japanese grammar. Today I will be continuing my conditional series with the explanation and the step-by-step guide through the usage of the Tara conditional. Now, the Tara conditional by itself is very flexible, and this flexibility is one of the reasons why it is very difficult to master this conditional and use it correctly, because it can be used in a variety of ways. However, this video will provide you with a detailed guide about each and every aspect of the Tara conditional. And I have structured this video to act precisely as that, as a complete guide. So this video will be lengthy and I will try my best to explain everything that you need to know about the Tara conditional in order to use it properly. So without further ado, let's get cracking because we have a lot of ground to cover with this one. Alright, so what do we need to know about Tara that would count as the basics of it? First, we need to know how to attach it. And we attach it rather simply to verbs and adjectives by first forming their simple past form, the ta form, and then adding ra to it, while the nouns take the dattara suffix. But I have dedicated an entire section of this video to the construction pattern, so I will talk about that in a bit more detail in that section. The second thing that you need to remember are the translations of the Tara conditional and by extension its usage, and it's usually translated to if, when, and after. Now I have underlined here the when and after translation because they are a whole lot closer to the essence of this conditional than if. Of course you can use Tara as if, but when and after are something also that is really explaining to you the real essence and the core of this conditional. So they are very important to differentiate between. And the third point here is arguably the most important thing about the Tara conditional itself, and that is the strong emphasis on a certain time sequence. And this is very, very important because whenever you see Tara in a sentence, you can be sure that a time sequence is also present that needs to be followed and respected to the letter, because it always emphasizes that the first action must be done or that it must occur before the second could be done or that before it could occur. And this is very, very important. These 3 points are really the bare bones stuff about Tara that you really need to know in advance before you can proceed further. So the first point is to always know how to form the Tara conditional depending on the word type. After that, we have the usual translations, and they are if, when, and after. And finally, we have here displayed the essence of the Tara conditional, and that is the emphasis on the time sequence that exists in a conditional sentence that contains Tara. So these 3 points are really the most important things that you need to know about Tara before you can proceed further. Now let's see the second part of this list that covers the basics of the Tara usage. The first point here is that you can also find Tara expressing negative conditions like ba. After that, you can also see it often paired with Moshi to indicate that Tara is being used as a conditional. Now this is very important because you want to eliminate ambiguity of any type when you are conveying something, or let's be more precise, conveying a sentence with Tara to your listener, because Tara can also mean when and after. You need to somehow, let's say, determine Tara here that it is being used as a conditional, and that is why this pairing with Moshi is very often seen, and I personally urge you to use it when you want to treat Tara as a conditional instead of a time reference point indicator. Now after that, we should also know that Tara appears frequently with questions of the what should I do type. Then you can also use Tara to reference and make suggestions in response. All of these are covered in my examples section and you will see them in action there. The fourth thing that we need to know about tara is also that it can be paired with noni. It's practically the same as with ba, because here tara is used to express regret over a counterfactual condition. That is perhaps the most important thing that you need to remember about it, but when you want to express regret, you can always pair it up with noni. And finally, we can also see, so in everyday Japanese, both spoken and written, that the conditional tara itself can be used to reference a certain thing or event in the future. And this is also very, very frequent in your modern Japanese. So this list here finishes the basics of the tara conditional, and once again the most important things are first that tara can also reference the future, that it can express negative conditions, that it is often paired with moshi to indicate that it is being used as a conditional, and also it appears frequently with the questions of what should I do type, with references and making suggestions in response. Another thing that is, in my opinion, not so frequent is that tara can express regret when paired with noni. So this is, let's say, the list of the most important things that you need to know about tara when you are beginning to study it. And I urge you to review this section of the video before proceeding further into the examples and the formation process. Now, let's see the formation process for the tara conditional. As in my previous video with ba, here I will also use all of the word types to illustrate how to get the tara conditional. The first will be the nouns, and I have here decided to use kuruma once again as an example, and you need to add dattara to it in the case of the positive condition, or devanakattara if you need the negative condition. And so we have kuruma dattara and kuruma deva nakattara. You can see here that the positive condition has been highlighted with this darker orange and the negative condition has been highlighted with blue. However, if you are adding tara to the na adjectives, you will be essentially adding the same suffixes as with the nouns, because here kyoryoku na, meaning powerful, will become kyoryoku dattara and kyoryoku deva nakattara. However, first big changes occur when you want to add tara to the I adjectives, and I have chosen here takai for this purpose. And then takai becomes takakattara and takaku nakattara. You can already notice here which forms have been used. In the case of the positive condition, first I have changed the adjective takai into its plain past form and then added ra. So that is nothing difficult here. However, when you want to express a negative condition, things get a little bit more complicated. First, you need to change the adjective into its negative form. Then you need to change the nai part of it into the past form, into its simple form, past, and then add ra. And you will get takaku nakattara. So you first need to form the takaku nai part. After that, change that takaku nai part into the takaku nakatta, and only then add ra. So in my opinion, the I adjectives are maybe the most difficult ones to use with the tara conditional, but after enough practice, it becomes easier. Now, something similar happens with godan verbs here, and I have chosen toru here, meaning to take, as my example. So in the case of the positive condition, we have tottara, and in the case of the negative condition, we have tora nakattara. The formation pattern is practically the same as the I adjectives because you need to form first the negative form in the case of the negative condition, and only then you can add ra once you also change that negative form into its past form. But you will need to practice this in order to get it and to become fluent in it. In my opinion, Ichidan verbs are a little bit easier because the verb taberu here, meaning to eat, becomes tabetara in the case of the positive condition and becomes tabenakattara in the case of a negative condition. And finally, we have our irregular verbs kuru and suru. In the case of the positive condition, they become kitara and shitara, but if we need the negative condition, and then they become konakattara and shinakattara. As you can see here, there is a lot of things to remember when you are studying the process of the Tara conditional formation, and especially in the case of the I adjectives and the Godan verbs, but here practice is mandatory and it is the only thing that will happen that will help you to get more fluent at it. And with this out of the way, we will be getting to our examples and the core of this video. Now let's see our first set of examples for the Tara conditional, but this time we will be using Tara to express a certain time sequence. Our first example is the simplest one, but it conveys the essence of this usage of Tara. Soji o shitara eiga o見に行きます. After I finish cleaning, I will go to see a movie. As you can see here, of prime importance is the sequence that is established between these two actions. We are saying that first, the cleaning must be performed in order for us to go to see a movie. And we are here establishing a priority list. That is why Tara here is translated as after, not as when or if. Now, if you hear this sentence or read it in everyday Japanese, you can get confused because here both when and if could be used, although not appropriately. There will be certain, let's say, degrees of adjustment that you would have to do, but still it is a possibility. So in order to use Tara as a conditional, we should always add Moshi, as you see here in our second sentence. Now, Moshi here is, like we have talked about it in the Ba video, is simply an additional supplement to your sentences to introduce them as a conditional. And that is why Moshi here is exceptionally useful with Tara, because it eliminates that ambiguity that exists with Tara. So the listener can understand your sentence as you want him to understand, so that he would know that you are using Tara as if, not as when or after. And that is why the usage of Moshi is encouraged, and I advise you to use it, just to be extra clear when you are talking about something. So our second sentence goes as follows. Fransu e ittara Louvre bijutsukan ga otozuretai. When I go to France, I want to see the Louvre Museum. As you see here, once again, first there is an order of action. First, we must go to France in order for us to see the Louvre Museum. So that, let's say, rule of Tara, that condition of Tara itself has been fulfilled. Now you can always add Moshi here to get that meaning of if. However, if you do not add it, another valid translation is when. So once again, we are seeing here the full flexibility of Tara. Now, our third example here just follows and expands on everything that we have learned in the first and second sentence. Moshi, kono shousetsu o kattara Akemi-chan ni agetai desu. If I buy this novel, I want to give it to Akemi. So once again, we have a time sequence established between our two actions. So first, we have here a certain desire also expressed with Tara, and that is our desire to give it to Akemi, perhaps as a gift, but first, of course, we must buy it. So that is that time sequence expressed. And also you can add Moshi here if you want to make it sound as an if sentence, if you want to use Tara as a conditional. However, if you are not using Moshi here to, let's say, introduce this sentence, to highlight it as a conditional sentence, just be aware that the listener can interpret this as when, after, or if. So that is why I'm stressing this usage of Moshi so much, simply because I advise to be as clear as possible when using it as a conditional. And that is why I like always to say that when you are using Tara as a conditional, Moshi is a must. And finally, we have an example of a past form with our final sentence. Nihon de gijutsu sha toshite hataraitara Nihongo o skoshi zutsu narai mashita. When I worked as an engineer in Japan, little by little I have learned Japanese. So once again here we can deduce everything that we have learned about Tara up to this point presented in this sentence. So first we have the time sequence, and we are saying here that first we were working as an engineer in Japan, so that was the prerequisite, and only then we have learned a little of Japanese. So that time sequence moment has been established. And of course here first Tara has been used as when, because first if we add Moshi here it will be nonsensical, it will be a little bit incorrect, and that is why I'm always urging you to first determine how would you like to use Tara, what would you like to say with it, and if you are you're saying something that is in the mood of a conditional, or if you want to say something that is a condition, then you should use Moshi. However, if you want to express something that is more in the vein of after and when, then Moshi of course shouldn't be used, or it could be optional of course, but I think that the guide here that I have presented with the usage of Moshi and Tara is pretty much self-explanatory, as you can see from our examples. So that is the takeaway I would like you to remember from this section of the video, and that is to always remember when you see Tara in a certain sentence, there is a highlight of a time sequence, because Tara is following that time sequence to the letter. It is very rigid. And if you see Moshi, it is always, or let's say be always a supplement to introducing your sentence as a conditional one. So those are the most important points of this section. Now that we have covered the usage of Tara to express a certain time sequence between actions, now let's see Tara used to convey questions and or suggestions made in response. Let's say that Mr. Ken here is studying Japanese, and at some point of his studies he would ask something like this. 日本語がもっと早くなれるようにどうしたらいいですか? What should I do to learn Japanese faster? Notice here the construction どうしたらいい, because this is the default construction when you want to create questions of the what should I do type, as you see here. And his friend Mr. Yamamura might answer something like this. 毎日の会話を練習したらどうですか? How about practicing your everyday conversation? And he's making with this statement a certain suggestion in response, and once again uses Tara do. Now, before we proceed to our second conversation, I would like first to turn your attention to here the verbs to which we have attached Tara I, and that is the verb suru in both of our examples, because first we need to form its Tara form, and that is shitara in both cases. And in the case of the question, first you must add do in front of it, and after that I desu ka. But when you want to create a suggestion that is an answer to that question, then you should add do desu ka after it. So that is a very important point that you should remember and use it when you create your own examples during your own practice sessions. Now our second conversation here is a little bit different. We have here Mr. Kitakawa. 大学のプロジェクトにはどれの本を読んだらいいですか? Which book should I read for my college project? Notice here the changes that occur with the verb yomu, because it becomes yondara, and then we add I desu ka. Now let's say that his friend Mr. Tanaka responds with something like this. 私がドイツで買った最新の技術という本を読んだらどうですか? Why don't you read the book called The Newest Technologies that I bought in Germany? So you can once again see here the verb yomu change to its Tara form, and then we have do after it. Now, as you can see, of course, depending on what you want to ask, you can see that the usage of do in the questions part is not something that is required, because first we are asking in our first question, what should we do? That is why we have doshitara I. However, which book should I read? We have dore no hon wo yondara ii desu ka? So this first part is something that will vary depending on what the manner of you asking, to be more precise. So it really depends how, or let's say in what manner you are asking, and you should always keep that in mind when you are forming the questions. However, this last part of ii desu ka is something that is not changing, and especially when you are creating the suggestion in response to your question, because you can see here that both verbs suru and yomu have been changed appropriately to their tara form, and they have received do desu ka at the end. Now I know that this seems a little bit complicated, but with enough practice and enough examples covered, you will get fluent in it. So for now, always remember that when you are forming a what should I do question, it usually follows the doshitara I example. However, if you have a specific verb and a specific, let's say, a request that you are making, something similar as our second here example, you should always watch out of how to position that, all of those pieces of that construct, or if you need them all, like in the case of do, because we have here dore no, which. But that is a topic for another video that I will maybe cover in future. For now, it will suffice that you see here how tara is used, because tara here is the object of this video. So with this out of the way, we will be moving on to our next video section. And finally, we have arrived to the most important point of this video, or to be more precise, the most important section of this video, and that is the spotting and learning of the difference between ba and tara. Now, in most of the cases, ba and tara can be interchangeably used. However, there are certain instances where the usage of one above the other is advised. So, for example, if you have in your second clause in your sentence an order, recommendation or request, prohibition, desire or intent, then you should always use tara. Now this is the instance where you should really know the difference between ba and tara and use both of them accordingly. So if your second clause in the sentence you are writing or you want to say contains one of the written here parts, then you should always use tara. We will see this illustrated in the following sentence. That means if you are sending a package, give it to Mr. Yamada. As you can see here, there is a certain notion of an order being given here, and you can interpret this give it to Mr. Yamada as a sort of an order or recommendation or request, however you see fit. However, there is a certain interpretation to be made. So if you use here ba as in tsumi o okureba Yamada-san ni agenasai, that would be incorrect, because the second clause contains one of the written elements here that really require the usage of tara. So if you use it like this, Moshi tsumi o okuttara Yamada-san ni agenasai is the correct usage. So always bear that in mind. Now let's see a recommendation here that I have highlighted with gold here. If you are studying French, you should buy this book. So this is the sentence we are working with. Now if we use ba, フランス語を勉強すればこの本は買った方がいいです。It is not advised. It is against the rules here that we have. So here we have a recommendation, and that is why ba here would be inappropriate. However, if you use tara, then you will get the grammatically correct sentence. もしフランス語を勉強したら、この本は買った方がいいです。So, this is the most important thing here in this first part of the difference between ba and tara. We have three parts. Now, the first part has been covered. In this first part, we have learned that tara is always used when the second clause, as you see here in our examples, contains an order, recommendation or request, prohibition, desire or intent, then tara is really the only one that should be used, never ba. So bear that in mind. Now let's see the second part of this, let's say, section of the video devoted to the differences between ba and tara. And this definition goes as follows. However, if there is a stative verb or a state described, usually with adjectives, in the first clause, both ba and tara can be used. Now, this here is something that is a bit more elaborate than the previous point, because in the previous point we have established already that if there is a certain recommendation, prohibition, intent, and so on present in the second clause, then you cannot use ba. However, here we have something, let's say literally the opposite, because if you have a stative verb or a state described, then you can use also ba. Now, I support you if you want here to make things easier for yourself, because you want to tie tara specifically to those points, and that is also fine. However, I don't want you to be surprised if you read somewhere or hear that ba is used. So here the knowledge of English grammar is something that will really come in handy, because stative verbs are really the opposite of dynamic verbs, because they do not require a direct object, and that is a simple definition. However, they are not the topic of this video, and I'm not covering English grammar, so if you want a little bit more info on them, you can always read it up on the internet. And of course, when you have a state described, then you can also use ba. Now let's see this in our example to make it a little bit more clearer. So here we are saying, if you have time, please visit the temple. The case here is that we are using the stative verb to have, as in a state of having time, not actually holding it in your hands. And that is why here the usage of ba and tara is appropriate. It is correct to use both of them. You can use ba, you can use tara. There is no error here, simply because we have a stative verb, jikanga areba or moshi jikanga attara. So this is the case where you can use both ba and tara. And once again, when we have an adjective describing a state here without an action verb, then we can also use ba and tara. And this is the sentence. If you like it, I will give it to you. Skide areba ageyo and moshi skidattara ageyo. So once again, you see here in our second clauses of our sentences here that we have requests, that we have an intent, a desire, something that we have in the previous section tied exclusively to tara. However, you can use ba as long as the first clause of these sentences is different, and different in a way that it contains a stative verb or a state. Then you can use ba. So once again, if you have made it easier for yourself to remember tara as being the one that handles, let's say, those situations with intents, prohibitions, and requests, then it's fine. However, if you come across the usage of ba in this, let's say, manner, I just wanted to make my video a complete guide, because it needs to cover all of the points, and I really don't want you to be confused if you, for example, read in the newspaper a sentence that uses ba in this manner. So you need to remember, whenever you have a stative verb or a state described, you can use both ba and tara. So it's really up to you in those cases. And let's put the end on the difference between ba and tara section of the video by creating a certain, let's say, crowning section where we will analyze a sentence that it's seemingly as the same when used with both ba and tara, and that is mondai ga areba Yamada-san wo yonde kudasai in the case of ba, and in the case of tara, mondai ga attara Yamada-san wo yonde kudasai. Now, you can already conclude for yourself that when you read these two sentences, really they almost amount to the same thing. So if you have problems, you should call Mr. Yamada. You should really call Mr. Yamada as a sort of request here, because we have kudasai. Now, what is the difference here? You can use both of them, of course, because they are certainly almost the same here, but there are subtle nuances that you really should remember here in order to understand both of these conditionals. And I think that this section is the most difficult one in the video because here you will need to apply everything that you have learned about these two conditionals in order to differentiate between them correctly. Now remember what I have said. These conditionals can be used interchangeably, but you will notice the difference here being in those nuances, in those shades, simply because there are, let's say, certain things pertained to each of these sentences that a conditional carries with itself. So let's analyze first the first sentence here that uses ba to express a condition. First, we need to determine what type of the condition this is. It is a hypothetical condition, meaning that both the condition and the result are still pending. They're still waiting to be executed, and as per definition, all of the conditionals can be used here. But this time we have used the example with ba and tara. So we have this first part sorted. However, second is the overall impression of the sentence. So this sentence subtly conveys the meaning of calling Mr. Yamada only if there are problems. Problems can occur, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they will. Now this only here is really important because you really get that sense of exclusivity when you read this sentence. Mondai ga areba Yamada-san no yonde kudasai. So you are really saying to the listener here, if he has any problems, if he would encounter any problems, then only then he should call Mr. Yamada. Now, the third thing that we must consider in this sentence is the temporal relationship. And overall, it is unimportant because here problems can occur, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they will. And this sentence is not specifically set in a given period of time. And finally, we have the recommended translation. If you have problems, please call Mr. Yamada. Now I have decided to use here if only to convey that essence that we have seen in our second point here, and that is to call Mr. Yamada only when there are problems. The problems can happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will. There is no inevitability to them. Now, let's turn our attention to the second sentence that uses tara as a conditional. Once again, we have the hypothetical condition that does not change. However, there is a difference here. Here, because this sentence subtly conveys the meaning of calling Mr. Yamada when you have problems, meaning that the problems need to occur first in order for Mr. Yamada to be called. So we have that time sequence here, and that is why the temporal relationship here is of crucial importance, because the problems must occur first in order for Mr. Yamada to be called. Now you can always say that there is very little difference between the first and the second sentence, but you can notice here that this when moment, this temporal thing is very important because you are highlighting here the temporal relationship that exists between the process of, let's say, having those problems and the calling of Mr. Yamada. So here, in order for Mr. Yamada to be called, the problems must occur first. And this is the lesson we have learned in this video, because it is focused on tara, that this process of having problems must happen first. So there is a certain dosage of inevitability with this sentence. You're practically saying that these problems will happen. So that is the, let's say, nuance that the listener will receive if you use tara like this. And finally, we have the recommended translation. When you have problems, please call Mr. Yamada. So there you have it. I have analyzed the usage of ba and tara in every aspect. So you can see here that the subtle differences are the key here, because tara has a certain dosage of inevitability, let's say, embedded in its sentence. However, ba here is something that is providing an exclusive condition, focuses on the condition, and it is not placed in a specific time frame. It is not given a frame of time to happen in. So these are the most important things for you to remember. So once again, to summarize, the differences between ba and tara are subtle, but they exist. So when the second clause contains any of the elements that we have talked about, such as prohibitions, bans, intents, desires, recommendations, then tara should be used. However, if you have a stative verb or an adjective describing a condition, then you can use both ba and tara. And also from this third part, you should be wary of these, let's say, subtle differences in conveying a certain dosages of inevitability, or if you want to stress a certain time reference or a certain time sequence. Then you should really know and understand the differences with ba and tara. Now let's deliver the finishing blow to our lesson today. So what have we learned? We have learned that the conditional tara is a flexible conditional that can mean if, when, and after. We have also learned that it has a strong time relationship, or to be more precise, that it presents a strong time relationship between the condition and the result in our sentence, that it is often paired with moshi to indicate that it is used as a conditional, not as an after or when indicator, and that is often used in suggestions, reference, and should questions. Otsukare-sama deshita, my dear Shokun. Thank you for watching this video in my conditional series that deals with the conditional tara. Now I know that this video is perhaps a bit on the lengthy side simply because of the amount of the information we had to cover, but I certainly hope that I have managed to help you to learn this conditional, or at least to understand it a little bit better. So in case you still have any questions, or you would like to leave your opinion on this conditional, or maybe there is something that I have missed or not explained or in detail, in as much detail as you would have liked, you can always leave the comment below, your own opinion below, because I do read all of them. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again in the dojo next time. Sayonara!